They came for a story, but what they witnessed in Central Park left them speechless. Thousands of Americans stood still, overwhelmed by the sound of al-Adha prayers, and something inside them began to shift. The first rays of dawn broke over Central Park in Manhattan, casting long shadows across the expansive green lawns that would soon be transformed into something extraordinary. Sarah Martinez adjusted her press badge and checked her camera equipment one more time. As a journalist for the New York Tribune, she had covered countless cultural events, but this assignment felt different somehow. Her editor had asked her to document the massive Eid al-Adha gathering, expected to draw over 10,000 Muslims from across the tri-state area. "Just get the human interest angle," her editor had said dismissively. "Show them being normal Americans, you know. Counter some of the negative narratives." Sarah had nodded, but privately wondered if there was more to this story than a simple community gathering. She had grown up in a predominantly Christian household in suburban Connecticut, attended church sporadically, and like many Americans her age, had settled into a comfortable agnosticism that asked few hard questions about life's deeper meanings. As she walked toward the designated prayer area, already bustling with volunteers setting up sound systems and unrolling thousands of prayer rugs, Sarah noticed something that would stay with her long after this day ended. Despite the early hour, despite the logistical complexity of organizing such a massive gathering, every person she observed moved with a sense of purpose that seemed almost sacred. There was no rushing, no visible stress, just quiet determination and frequent smiles exchanged between strangers. "Excuse me, sister, do you need help finding anything?" Sarah turned to see a woman about her own age, wearing a beautiful emerald hijab and pushing a stroller with one hand, while balancing a box of water bottles with the other. "Oh, I'm actually a journalist," Sarah replied, showing her press badge. "I'm here to cover the event." The woman's face lit up. "How wonderful! I'm Amina. This is my first Eid in New York since moving here from Michigan. The community here is just incredible. Are you familiar with Eid al-Adha?" Sarah shook her head honestly. "Not really. I know it's a Muslim holiday, but that's about it." "Would you like me to explain while we walk? I'm heading to help with the setup anyway." As they moved through the growing crowd, Amina began sharing the story of Prophet Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son in obedience to God, and how God provided a ram instead, establishing the tradition of sacrifice and charity that defines Eid al-Adha. But what struck Sarah wasn't just the story itself, but the way Amina told it, with a reverence and personal connection that made it feel immediate and relevant. "So it's about submission to God's will, but also about God's mercy," Amina explained. "And it's about sharing what we have with others, especially those in need. The meat from the sacrificial animals is distributed to family, friends, and especially to the poor. No one should go hungry on Eid." Sarah found herself asking follow-up questions, genuinely curious for the first time in years about matters of faith and meaning. Around them, the park was filling with families of every conceivable background. She saw women in colorful hijabs from South Asia, walking alongside others in elegant West African dress. Men in traditional white robes greeted others in simple business casual attire. Children ran between groups, their laughter creating a soundtrack of joy that seemed to lift the morning air. "The diversity is incredible," Sarah observed, raising her camera to capture a group of elderly men from what appeared to be several different ethnic backgrounds, engaged in animated conversation in multiple languages. "That's one of the most beautiful things about Islam," Amina replied. "We come from everywhere, but we're united in our faith. You'll see when the prayer begins. Differences in language, culture, skin color, economic status, they all fade away when we stand shoulder to shoulder facing Mecca." As if summoned by her words, the call to prayer began to echo across the park. Sarah had heard the adhan before, usually as background noise in news reports from foreign countries, but hearing it live, amplified across acres of green space, and reflected back by the Manhattan skyline, was entirely different. The Arabic words she couldn't understand somehow spoke to something deeper than language. Dr. Michael Thompson, a cardiologist at Mount Sinai Hospital, had arrived early with his wife Jennifer and their 2 teenage children. They lived on the Upper East Side, considered themselves culturally Jewish, though not particularly observant, and had never attended a Muslim religious gathering before. They were here because their daughter Emma's best friend at school was Muslim, and the friend had extended a casual invitation. "I thought it might be educational," Michael had told his wife when she expressed mild reservations about attending. "The kids should understand the world they're living in." But as the morning progressed, Michael found himself experiencing something he hadn't expected. The organization, the genuine warmth of strangers, the palpable sense of community, all reminded him of something he realized he had been missing in his own life. When had he last felt part of something larger than himself? When had his own religious observances felt like anything more than cultural obligation? "Dad, look at how many people are here," his son David whispered as thousands of worshippers began arranging themselves in perfectly straight rows across the grass. "How do they all know where to stand?" Michael watched in fascination as what had seemed like chaos moments before transformed into precise geometric patterns. No one was directing traffic, no ushers were organizing crowds, yet somehow thousands of people were creating a human mandala of worship that stretched toward every horizon. Jennifer grabbed his arm. "Michael, do you see that?" She pointed toward a section where a man in an expensive suit was standing next to someone who was clearly homeless, both preparing for prayer with equal dignity. "When's the last time you saw something like that in our temple?" The imam's voice rose above the crowd, and even though the sermon was delivered in Arabic with English translation, Michael found himself moved by the cadence, the obvious sincerity, the way thousands of people hung on every word as if their lives depended on it. Across the park, Maria Gonzalez was having her own moment of recognition. A single mother working 2 jobs to support her family, she had brought her 8-year-old son Carlos because her Muslim co-worker had assured her there would be free food and a welcoming atmosphere for children. What she hadn't expected was to feel so immediately at home among people she had never met. "Mommy, why is everyone so happy?" Carlos asked, watching children of all ages playing together while adults smiled and chatted easily. "I don't know, mijo," Maria admitted, "but it feels good, doesn't it?" A woman approached them with a warm smile. "First time at Eid?" she asked in lightly accented English. "Yes, my friend at work invited us. I'm Maria, this is Carlos." "I'm Fatima. We're so happy you came. Has anyone explained what's happening today?" As Fatima shared the significance of the holiday, Maria found herself thinking about her own struggles with faith. Raised Catholic, she had drifted away from regular church attendance after her divorce, partly from shame, partly from exhaustion, but mostly because she had stopped feeling like her questions were welcome. Here, surrounded by strangers who somehow felt like family, she began to wonder if she had been looking for God in the wrong places. The moment that would change everything for hundreds of people in attendance came when the actual prayer began. As thousands of Muslims stood as one, then bowed as one, then prostrated as one, a profound silence settled over Central Park that seemed to extend beyond the immediate gathering. Even the city noise, the ever-present hum of traffic and construction that forms the background soundtrack of New York life, seemed to pause in respect. Sarah, who had been moving through the crowd taking photographs, found herself standing completely still, her camera lowered, watching what felt like a choreographed expression of complete surrender. She had witnessed plenty of religious services before, weddings, funerals, holiday celebrations. But nothing had prepared her for the visual and emotional impact of 10,000 people moving in perfect unison, their foreheads touching the earth in submission to something greater than themselves. It's called sujud, whispered a voice beside her. She turned to see an elderly man with a kind face and a neatly trimmed white beard. The prostration. In this position, we are all equal before God. The rich man and the poor man, the doctor and the janitor, the young and the old. All equal. Are you the imam? Sarah asked quietly, not wanting to disturb the prayer. One of them, I'm Imam Hassan. You're documenting our celebration? Yes, but Sarah struggled to find words for what she was experiencing. I've never seen anything like this. The beauty is not in the numbers, Imam Hassan said gently, though there is something powerful about communal worship. The beauty is in the sincerity. Every person here chose to wake up early, travel here, stand with their community, and humble themselves before their Creator. That choice, that moment of surrender, it transforms both the individual and the collective. As the prayer concluded and people began to rise, Sarah noticed something extraordinary happening. Instead of the usual post-event dispersal she was accustomed to covering, people lingered. Families who had never met exchanged contact information. Business cards were shared alongside hugs. Children who had been strangers an hour before were already making plans for playdates. Dr. Thompson found himself in conversation with a taxi driver from Bangladesh who turned out to have fascinating insights about American foreign policy. Jennifer was comparing notes on teenage parenting challenges with a woman who ran a nonprofit organization. Their children were already part of a growing group planning to meet up later in the week. This isn't what I expected, Michael admitted to the imam he had been introduced to. What did you expect? Imam Rashid asked with genuine curiosity. I honestly don't know. Something more foreign, I guess, more different from what I grew up with. Islam teaches that we are all children of Adam and Eve, all part of one human family. The differences between us are meant to be sources of learning and beauty, not division. What you're seeing today is what happens when people remember that. Maria found herself in a circle of mothers sharing parenting strategies and offering each other support. When Carlos mentioned that he had been struggling with bullying at school, 3 women immediately offered their children as potential friends and playmates. When Maria mentioned her financial stress, 2 people quietly slipped her business cards for job opportunities. Is this normal? She asked Fatima, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers. This is Islam, Fatima replied simply. We are taught that we are responsible for each other. Your struggles are our struggles. Your joy is our joy. As the formal ceremonies concluded and families began gathering for communal meals spread across dozens of picnic blankets, Sarah realized that her assignment had evolved into something much more personal. She wasn't just documenting a community event anymore. She was witnessing a way of life that seemed to offer answers to questions she hadn't even known she was asking. The distribution of food revealed another layer of the day's meaning. Tables were set up with dishes representing the global nature of New York's Muslim community. Lamb biryani, Middle Eastern mansaf, West African jollof rice, Turkish kebabs, Somali anjero, Indonesian rendang. But the remarkable thing wasn't the variety of food. It was the way it was shared. Every table welcomed strangers. Every dish was offered freely. No one asked about religious affiliation or background before extending an invitation to eat. In Islam, feeding people is one of the highest forms of worship, explained Imam Hassan when Sarah asked about the obvious abundance. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said that a person is not a true believer if they go to sleep with a full stomach while their neighbor goes hungry. Sarah watched as homeless individuals from the surrounding area were not just welcomed but given seats of honor at several tables. She saw well-dressed professionals serving food to anyone who approached. She observed children being taught to offer the best portions to guests and elders. This is how it's supposed to be, she murmured, almost to herself. How what's supposed to be? Asked Dr. Thompson, who had ended up at the same table. Community, religion, life, maybe. Sarah paused, surprised by her own words. I grew up going to church, but it never felt like this. It never felt like it was actually changing how people treated each other. I've been thinking the same thing, Michael admitted. My wife and I, we go to temple on high holidays, but it's more cultural than spiritual. This feels different. It feels like these people actually believe what they're saying, and more importantly, they're living it. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of children reciting something in Arabic, their young voices carrying clearly across the park. Sarah looked around to see dozens of kids, from toddlers to teenagers, participating in what appeared to be an impromptu Islamic education session under a cluster of trees. They're reciting Quran, explained a woman nearby, teaching the younger ones some basic chapters. It's beautiful, isn't it? The way the language sounds? Sarah had to admit it was beautiful. More than that, there was something about hearing these ancient words recited by children's voices in the middle of Manhattan that felt both timeless and completely contemporary. As the afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows across the park, the formal program concluded with communal prayers of gratitude and remembrance. But instead of people beginning to pack up and leave, Sarah noticed that many were settling in for what appeared to be extended socializing. Families were combining their blankets to create larger gathering spaces. New friendships were forming in real time. She approached a group of women who seemed to represent every continent on Earth, all engaged in animated conversation while keeping watchful eyes on children playing nearby. Excuse me, I'm a journalist covering today's event. Would any of you mind sharing what this day means to you? It means family, said a woman with a slight accent Sarah couldn't place. Not just blood family, but chosen family. Everyone here is my sister or brother. It means remembering what's important, added another. In our daily lives, we get so caught up in work, bills, problems. Today reminds us that we are part of something bigger. For me, said a third woman, it means hope. Hope that my children will grow up in a world where people can come together like this, where differences don't divide us. Sarah found herself nodding, feeling something shift inside her chest. When had she last felt genuinely hopeful about the state of the world? When had she last felt part of something that mattered? As the day wound down and people finally began the slow process of cleaning up and saying goodbye, Sarah realized she didn't want to leave. The warmth, the sense of belonging, the feeling that she had glimpsed something authentic and meaningful, all combined to create a reluctance to return to her normal life. You look thoughtful, observed Imam Hassan, appearing beside her as she packed up her camera equipment. I am, Sarah admitted. This has been unlike anything I've ever experienced. What struck you most? Sarah considered the question seriously. The way people treated each other, the way they included strangers, the way their religion seemed to make them kinder rather than more judgmental. I guess I've gotten used to thinking that religious people are usually trying to prove they're better than everyone else. Islam teaches us that the best among us are those who benefit others the most, Imam Hassan replied. If our faith doesn't make us more compassionate, more generous, more humble, then we're missing the point. Can I ask you something? Sarah said, surprising herself with the question. How does someone learn more about Islam? I mean, someone who wasn't raised Muslim. Imam Hassan's face broke into the kind of smile that seemed to light up the gathering dusk. Someone who sincerely seeks knowledge will always find teachers ready to share. There are classes at most mosques, books in every library, and more importantly, there are people like those you met today who live their faith in ways that speak louder than any lecture. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple card. This has information about our mosque, including times for our weekly community dinners and study circles. Everyone is welcome. Everyone. As Sarah took the card, she felt as if she were standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. For the first time in her adult life, she found herself genuinely curious about matters of faith, purpose, and meaning. The story she had come to write about others had somehow become a story about herself. In the days following the Central Park gathering, something unprecedented began happening across New York City and beyond. Social media posts from the event had gone viral, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of the usual divisive commentary that accompanied religious content online, these posts were generating thousands of comments from people sharing their own experiences of spiritual searching, their questions about Islam, and their desire to learn more. Sarah found herself checking Imam Hassan's card multiple times a day. She had written her article about the Eid celebration, focusing on the remarkable diversity and unity she had witnessed, but the piece felt incomplete. How could she convey the emotional impact of what she had experienced? How could she explain that covering a religious event had somehow awakened her own spiritual hunger? 3 days after Eid, she made a decision that surprised even her. She would attend the mosque's weekly community dinner. The Islamic Center of Manhattan was located in a converted brownstone on the Upper West Side, its presence marked only by Arabic calligraphy above the entrance and the gentle sound of running water from a fountain in the small courtyard. Sarah had walked past similar buildings hundreds of times without giving them a second thought, but now she paused to really observe the peaceful atmosphere, the way evening light filtered through geometric patterns in the windows. Inside, she was immediately struck by the same warmth she had experienced in Central Park. A woman about her mother's age approached with a welcoming smile. "Assalamu alaikum, dear. Are you here for the community dinner?" "I hope so," Sarah replied uncertainly. "I'm not Muslim, but Imam Hassan invited me." "Everyone is welcome here," the woman said firmly. "I'm Sister Khadija. Come, let me introduce you to some people." The community room was filled with an even more diverse group than Sarah had encountered at Eid. She saw families with young children, college students, elderly individuals, people in traditional Islamic dress, and others in typical New York casual wear. What united them wasn't appearance but atmosphere, the same sense of genuine community she was beginning to associate with Islamic gatherings. Dr. Thompson was there, along with his wife Jennifer. They spotted Sarah across the room and waved her over. "I can't believe you're here too," Jennifer said, looking both pleased and slightly embarrassed. "Michael hasn't stopped talking about the Eid celebration. We decided we needed to learn more." "Same here," Sarah admitted. "I keep thinking about what I witnessed. It felt so authentic." They were joined by Maria, who had brought Carlos and seemed much more relaxed than she had appeared at the park event. "Carlos has been asking about Islam every day since Eid," Maria explained. "Finally, I decided we should come and get some real answers, instead of me just saying, 'I don't know' to everything." The evening began with Maghrib prayer, the sunset prayer that Sarah watched from the back of the room. She was struck again by the visual beauty of communal worship, but also by something subtler. The way people of all ages and backgrounds arranged themselves naturally into rows. The way teenagers stood respectfully beside elderly community members. The way the prayer seemed to create instant calm in what had been a bustling social gathering. After prayer, everyone gathered for a meal that had been prepared collectively. As dishes were passed and conversations began, Sarah found herself at a table with people whose life stories spanned continents and decades. "I converted to Islam 15 years ago," shared Rebecca, a woman with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes. "I was raised Baptist in Georgia, moved to New York for law school, and thought I had life figured out. Then I met some Muslim classmates who invited me to an event like this, and everything changed." "What do you mean everything changed?" asked Michael, leaning forward with obvious interest. I mean my whole understanding of what religion could be, Rebecca replied. In my childhood church, religion was about following rules to avoid punishment. In Islam, I discovered that faith could be about love, surrender, and service to others. It was liberating. A young man named Ahmed, who appeared to be a college student, joined the conversation. I was born Muslim, but honestly, I didn't really understand my own faith until I started college and had to explain it to non-Muslim friends. That's when I realized how beautiful and logical Islamic teachings are. What do you mean by logical? Sarah asked. Well, take the concept of monotheism, Ahmed replied. Islam teaches that there is one God, indivisible, without partners or intermediaries. That simplicity appeals to both the heart and the mind. Or consider the 5 pillars. They're not arbitrary rules, but a comprehensive system for spiritual development and social responsibility. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself asking increasingly personal questions. How did prayer work? What was the significance of fasting during Ramadan? How did Islamic teachings apply to modern ethical dilemmas? Each question was answered not just with intellectual explanations, but with personal testimonies from community members who shared how these practices had impacted their daily lives. The beauty of Islam, explained Imam Hassan when he joined their table, is that it provides both transcendent meaning and practical guidance. It's not just about belief, it's about how belief transforms the way we live. Can you give an example? Asked Jennifer. Consider charity or zakat, the Imam replied. It's not just about giving money to feel good about yourself. It's calculated as a percentage of wealth, paid annually, designed to create economic justice and remind us that our resources are ultimately gifts from God to be shared responsibly. Maria raised her hand tentatively. What about women in Islam? I've heard a lot of negative things. I'm glad you asked, said Sister Khadija, rejoining the conversation. I've been Muslim for 30 years, and I can tell you that Islam was the first religion to give women legal rights, property rights, and educational rights. The negative images you see in media often reflect cultural practices, not Islamic teachings. She was joined by several other women at the table who shared their own experiences. Sarah listened, fascinated, as professional women, mothers, and students explained how their faith had empowered rather than restricted them. The hijab, for example, explained Dr. Amina, a pediatrician who had been introduced earlier, is not about oppression. For me, it's about spiritual identity and freedom from society's constant pressure on women to be decorative rather than substantive. As the evening concluded with communal cleanup and informal socializing, Sarah realized that her intellectual curiosity was evolving into something deeper. These weren't just interesting ideas. They were principles that seemed to offer a framework for living that she had been unconsciously seeking. Sister Sarah, called Imam Hassan as people began to leave. How did you find this evening? Overwhelming, Sarah replied honestly. In the best possible way. I have so many questions. Questions are the beginning of wisdom, the Imam replied with a smile. Would you be interested in attending our weekly study circle? We're currently reading through the Quran, discussing both the text and its practical applications. Sarah heard herself saying yes before she had consciously made the decision. Over the following weeks, similar scenes played out across the country. The social media coverage of Eid al-Adha celebrations had sparked curiosity in communities from Los Angeles to Miami, from Seattle to Houston. Mosques reported unprecedented numbers of non-Muslims attending community events, asking questions, and requesting information about Islam. In Chicago, a public radio producer named David Kim attended an interfaith dialogue at a local mosque and found himself deeply moved by the emphasis on social justice and community responsibility that seemed central to Islamic teaching. In Phoenix, a retired teacher named Linda Washington joined a women's study group at the Islamic Center near her home and discovered intellectual and spiritual stimulation she hadn't experienced since graduate school decades earlier. In Atlanta, a young software engineer named Marcus Johnson began attending Friday prayers after being impressed by his Muslim colleagues' dedication to their faith and their treatment of others. What all these seekers shared was a sense that they had encountered something authentic in a world that often felt superficial, something meaningful in a culture that seemed increasingly materialistic, something unifying in a society that felt increasingly divided. The study circle Sarah joined met weekly in the mosque's library, a quiet room lined with books in Arabic, English, and several other languages. The group included longtime Muslims eager to deepen their understanding, recent converts sharing their journeys, and curious non-Muslims exploring Islamic teachings. Tonight we're reading from Surah al-Baqarah, the chapter about the cow, explained Brother Omar, the study circle leader. But don't let the name fool you. This chapter contains some of the most profound philosophical and practical guidance in the Quran. As they read and discussed verses about faith, charity, forgiveness, and social responsibility, Sarah found herself taking notes, not just as a journalist, but as someone seeking personal guidance. This verse says, "And whoever saves a life, it is as if he has saved all of mankind," she read aloud. That's beautiful, but what does it mean practically? It means that every human life has infinite value, responded Sister Aisha, a nurse who had converted to Islam several years earlier. In my work at the hospital, that principle guides how I treat every patient, regardless of their background or circumstances. It also means that social justice isn't optional, added Brother Hassan, a social worker. If we truly believe every life has infinite value, then we have to work against systems that devalue certain lives. Week after week, Sarah found her understanding deepening. She began to see Islam not as a foreign religion, but as a comprehensive way of life that addressed questions she had been carrying unconsciously for years. How should one relate to money and material possessions? How should one treat family, friends, and strangers? How should one understand suffering and joy? How should one prepare for death? The turning point came during a discussion about the concept of surrender, or Islam in Arabic. Surrender sounds passive, Sarah observed, like giving up. Actually, it's the opposite, replied Imam Hassan. True surrender requires tremendous courage and strength. It means surrendering your ego, your fears, your need to control everything, in order to align yourself with something greater than yourself. Can you give an example? Think about a musician in an orchestra, the Imam suggested. Each musician could try to play their own song, create their own rhythm, follow their own vision. But the result would be chaos. Beautiful music only emerges when each musician surrenders their individual desires to serve the larger composition. Sarah felt something click into place. For years she had been trying to create meaning through her career, her relationships, her achievements, but always with the nagging sense that something was missing. What if the missing piece wasn't something she needed to achieve, but something she needed to surrender? That night, alone in her apartment, Sarah found herself doing something she hadn't done since childhood. Praying. Not the formal Islamic prayers she had been observing, but a simple, honest conversation with God. "I don't know if I'm ready to convert to Islam," she whispered into the darkness. "But I know I can't go back to the way things were before. Help me understand what you want from me." Meanwhile, across the city, similar conversations were taking place in dozens of apartments, houses, and dorm rooms. The ripple effects from that Eid celebration continued expanding, touching lives in ways both subtle and profound. Dr. Thompson had begun incorporating Islamic principles into his medical practice, taking time for brief moments of reflection and gratitude between patients. Jennifer had started volunteering at a local food bank, inspired by the Islamic emphasis on serving those in need. Maria had enrolled Carlos in weekend Arabic classes at the mosque, not because she had converted, but because she wanted him to understand the language of the prayers that had moved them both so deeply. The phenomenon extended beyond individual spiritual searching. Communities were being transformed as well. Interfaith dialogue groups were forming. Social justice initiatives were expanding. Local mosques were receiving requests for educational programs from schools, community centers, and religious organizations. What we're witnessing, observed Dr. Jamil Hassan, a professor of religious studies at Columbia University, is not just individual conversion, but cultural awakening. People are discovering that Islam offers not just personal spiritual fulfillment, but also models for community building and social responsibility that are desperately needed in our current moment. The media began to take notice, though not always in ways that pleased the Muslim community. Some outlets sensationalized the conversion numbers, framing them as evidence of either Islamic conquest or Christian decline. Others dismissed the phenomenon as a temporary trend driven by social media attention. But for those experiencing the spiritual transformation firsthand, the external commentary mattered less than the internal reality they were discovering. They were finding peace in prayer, purpose in submission to God, and community in shared faith. As summer progressed toward autumn, study circles at mosques across the country reported record attendance. Islamic bookstores saw unprecedented demand for Quran translations and introductory texts. Online Islamic education platforms experienced massive increases in enrollment. More significantly, conversion rates began to climb dramatically. The American Muslim Council estimated that conversion to Islam, which had been averaging around 20,000 annually, had increased by more than 300% in the months following the viral Eid celebrations. It's not just the numbers, explained Imam Abdullah from the Islamic Society of North America. It's the quality of the conversions. These aren't impulsive decisions. These are people who have been studying, reflecting, and seeking for months. They understand what they're committing to. Sarah reached her own moment of decision on a crisp October evening during the study circle's discussion of Surah al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran. This is the prayer that every Muslim recites at least 17 times a day, explained Brother Omar. It's both a request for guidance and an expression of gratitude for guidance already received. As they recited the chapter together in Arabic and then in English, Sarah felt a profound sense of recognition. These words expressed everything she had been feeling but couldn't articulate. Gratitude for the path she was discovering, recognition of her need for divine guidance, commitment to following that guidance wherever it led. Guide us to the straight path, the group recited together, the path of those you have blessed, not of those who have incurred your wrath, nor of those who have gone astray. In that moment, Sarah knew she was ready to take the step she had been contemplating for months. The Islamic Center was busier than usual on Friday afternoon, filled with the weekly congregation gathering for Jumu'ah prayers. But today was different. Word had spread through the community that several people would be taking their shahada, their declaration of faith, formally converting to Islam. Sarah sat in the women's section, her hands trembling slightly as she held a piece of paper with the Arabic phonetics written out carefully. Beside her sat Jennifer Thompson, who had made her own decision to convert the previous week. In the men's section, Dr. Thompson waited with similar nervous anticipation, having decided that his months of study and reflection had led him to the same conclusion as his wife. Maria was there too, having brought Carlos to witness what she described as the most important decision of my life. Over the months since that first Eid celebration, she had discovered that Islam provided answers to questions that had troubled her since childhood about the nature of God, the purpose of life, and the importance of community. "Are you nervous?" Jennifer whispered to Sarah. "Terrified," Sarah admitted, "but also more certain than I've ever been about anything." Imam Hassan approached the small group of conversion candidates. "Today is a blessed day," he said quietly. not just for you, but for our entire community. Each person who chooses Islam strengthens the Ummah, the global community of believers. The formal conversion ceremony was surprisingly simple. No elaborate rituals, no complicated procedures, just the sincere declaration of faith before witnesses. The Shahada is not magic words, the Imam explained to the gathered congregation. It's a commitment to a way of life. When someone says, La ilaha illa Allah, Muhammad Rasulullah, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger, they're not just making a statement of belief, they're committing to live according to that belief. One by one, the converts stood before the community and recited the declaration of faith. Sarah's voice was clear and strong as she spoke the Arabic words she had been practicing for weeks, followed by the English translation. As the final syllable left her lips, she felt something shift inside her chest, as if a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had suddenly lifted. The congregation erupted in quiet celebration, with community members approaching to offer congratulations, hugs, and welcomes to the faith. Sarah found herself surrounded by the same warmth and acceptance she had first experienced at the Eid celebration months earlier, but now it felt different. Now she was part of it, not just observing it. "How do you feel?" asked Sister Aisha, one of the first people to embrace Sarah after her conversion. "Like I'm finally home," Sarah replied, surprising herself with the honesty of the answer. Over the following weeks, the new converts began the practical process of learning to live as Muslims. Prayer times, dietary laws, social customs, Arabic pronunciation, all the details that transform intellectual understanding into lived experience. Sarah found the learning curve both challenging and exhilarating. Waking before dawn for Fajr prayer required a complete restructuring of her sleep schedule. Learning to pray in Arabic meant hours of practice and repetition. Understanding Islamic law and ethics meant studying texts and seeking guidance from more experienced community members. But with each passing day, she felt more grounded, more purposeful, more connected to something larger than herself. "The first year is always the hardest," Sister Khadija told her during one of their regular mentoring sessions. "You're not just learning new practices, you're developing a new identity. Be patient with yourself." The support system within the mosque proved invaluable. Experienced Muslims volunteered as mentors, study partners, and practical guides. New converts were paired with families willing to share meals and answer endless questions about everything from prayer postures to Islamic etiquette. Dr. Thompson threw himself into Islamic scholarship with the same intensity he had once devoted to medical research. His study desk became covered with Quran commentaries, hadith collections, and works of Islamic philosophy. His medical practice began to reflect Islamic principles of compassion and service. "I've been a doctor for 20 years, he told his wife one evening as they prepared for Maghrib prayer together. "But I've never felt like healing people was a form of worship until now." Jennifer found that Islamic teachings about family relationships and social responsibility gave new meaning to her work as a community volunteer. The Islamic emphasis on caring for elderly parents led her to reconnect with her own mother in ways she hadn't since her teenage years. Maria's transformation was perhaps the most visible. The confidence and peace she discovered in Islam affected every aspect of her life. She enrolled in community college classes inspired by Islamic teachings about They came for a story. But what they witnessed in Central Park left them speechless. Thousands of Americans stood still, overwhelmed by the sound of al-Adha prayers, and something inside them began to shift.